Good morning, everybody. I hope you are well. I'm just going to give it 30 more seconds to let some late joiners join. I don't want them missing any of this morning's session. So just going to give that 30 more seconds. I can see the numbers ticking up quite nicely. Any webinar or any content we do around certificates of sponsorship always get lots of interest as things are always changing with COSs, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about everything to do with COSs, or deep dive, as it says in the title. Maybe as we're waiting for everyone, feel free to say hello in the chat, say maybe the name of your organization, say where you're dialing in from. I can go first. Will from Borderless, based in London. It's really interesting to see where people are dialing in from. We get people from Scotland all the way down to Cornwall, sometimes Devon, my home county. Always have other organizations as well in London. So please feel free to say hello. It also makes it a lot more fun on my side and for Lowell to have a bit of interaction during this session. Hi Manpreet. Hi Tanaka from Coventry. Sarolotta from Poole, Dorset. I was actually down in Dorset a few weeks ago. It's a lovely area of the UK. Hopefully you've had a little bit of rain now. All the fields were looking quite parched. Hi Haley from London. You might be the closest person to us today. Yeah, lovely to meet many of you. Hi Marita, Surrey. Mercy from Birmingham. Leah from Bolton, Margaret from Essex. See, we've got people from everywhere today, which is really nice. Awesome. I can see lots of people have joined now. People are still saying hello, so we'll get back to a few more hellos later. But into today's session. So welcome and thank you for joining. This is our COS or CoS deep dive. Over the next 30 to 45 minutes, we're going to cover what's changing with the Home Office, how COSs actually work, and what the Home Office asks for with both requests and also maybe thinking about when you're assigning them, what our practical tips are, and the common pitfalls that get requests refused. For those who know me, apologies. But for those who don't, my name is William Murch. I'm head of growth here at Borderless. You may have met me one of many of the regional care roadshows. You may have met me at your local care association or skills for care registered manager meetings, or maybe an HR exhibition show in London. And I am also joined here today by our lead immigration advisor, Lul. Lul, I'm just wondering if you would like to do a quick intro.
Yeah, of course. Good morning, all. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Lowell. I'm the lead immigration advisor here at Borderless. I've been with Borderless for the last 3 years and in the overall immigration space for the last 8 years.
Thanks, Lowell. And yeah, Lowell's going to be walking through some slides whilst I cover some more general stuff. So feel free to use this time. Like Lowell is very, very busy. So if you do have any questions, anything burning, please put it into the chat, put it into the Q&A, and we can get back to you. Also, shout out to the third member of our team who's not live on video, but Prashanth, who is supporting the moderation in the chat. So feel free to ask any questions as we go throughout, and someone will be able to get back to you. Cool. And why are we here talking from Borderless? And essentially it's because we're on a mission, and the Borderless mission is a world where borders are no longer barriers, and anyone can move anywhere seamlessly and safely. But to break this down for what this means for you, we really just want to simplify the complexities of immigration for businesses and sponsored workers. And that's really starting in the UK by supporting organizations like you, secure COSs, go A to Z through the immigration journey and stay compliant throughout that. Cool. And then just a final piece of housekeeping from me. We've already started to make this morning a bit interactive, which is great, but feel free to continue to chat with us throughout, say hello, ask any questions in both the chat or the Q&A functionality as we go. And then finally, just no need to take too many small notes or try and screenshots or grab things here, there, and everywhere. This session will be recorded and you will be able to watch it back at your own speed. Maybe I'm talking too fast and you need to watch it back at half speed. Maybe I'm talking too slow and you need to watch it back at 2x speed. So feel free to tune in, relax, and try and absorb as much as possible throughout the next 45 minutes. So to keep you on your toes, I'm actually going to push out a poll straight away. And this is really going to help our narrative and what we're talking about throughout the rest of the session. And the question for you is, what trips you up most with CoS requests or anything to do with CoSs? Is it around knowing when to submit an annual or in-year allocation? Is it pulling the evidence together in time, with just those tight deadlines the Home Office gives? Or is it that your allocation is running low, you're waiting on more, just constant delays, or your requests are getting queried or refused? So I'm just going to put this poll out now. Please do let us know what's your biggest headache with everything surrounding certificates of sponsorship at the moment. I'm also just going to do another quick shout out to everyone else that said hello. Hi, Mary from Bedford, Craig, Northants, Karen from Leeds, Abdur from London, Brave Education. Awesome. Love the interaction this morning. Maybe everyone's excited for the bank holiday weekend. Who knows? Awesome. Back to the poll results then. So what we've seen in terms of the biggest headache for organizations here this morning. It looks like the biggest issue, which obviously myself and Lowell will be able to talk to more about as well, is allocations running low or waiting on more. We're seeing an uptick in delays currently faced by organizations getting COSs. So hopefully there's going to be lots in this morning's session to make you feel more comfortable about getting more COSs and how to deal with potential delays. Awesome. It's going to end this interaction now. But besides that, we also see, a handful of people are saying they're unsure about the annual versus in-year allocation, which is totally normal, and also pulling the evidence together in time. And again, a handful of people saying requests getting queried or refused. Again, something we're seeing across the board. So you're not alone with any of those answers. Cool. So quickly, what's on today's agenda? Now we know maybe what's the biggest headache of everyone. You know who myself and Lal are. We can go into the content. So today we'll be covering what's recently changed with the Home Office. Then we'll be segueing into how certificates of sponsorship actually work and what the Home Office wants, evidence, pitfalls, and tips. I'll be delivering what's changing with the Home Office. Then I'll be handing over to Lal, our expert, on the latter parts, and then we're just going to do a bit of an open Q&A at the end. So hopefully that sounds good with everyone. And please do keep the questions coming. I can already see one by Craig. We will get to that a bit later in the session, but already a great question. Thank you. So let's start with a shift. Everyone in the room is probably feeling the Home Office has really changed how it handles CoS requests, and it's caught a lot of sponsors out. So we're going to walk through what's different and why it matters for your hiring. And what we've seen across the board, and what we're seeing is a real shift, is the Home Office now routinely requires substantial additional documentation before it wants to grant COS allocation. And we're seeing refusals in situations that previously presented little difficulty. And the part that catches people out is mainly the timeline. When they come back asking for information, and you've also often just got 5 working days to respond. If you're not ready, you often find yourself scrambling, and this used to hit care providers the hardest. And now we're seeing it across all sectors. And again, this is just part of a broader picture of the increased scrutiny and enforcement that's being put on organizations going forward. But what does this increased scrutiny actually look like? It kind of plays. The reality is extra evidence requested after you've submitted, requests bouncing back with queries or refused outright, longer processing, and far more focus on whether the roles are genuine. And the realities of this are impactful for you and your organizations. So more admin landing on your team, which I think everyone hates the word admin, Frustration across HR and hiring. Maybe you want to put people in, you want people to start, but you don't have the CoSs to assign, which is holding up other business objectives, for example, delivering exceptional care or getting someone started on time. And in the worst case, it can really open up the door to a wider compliance review, delays, rework, and pressure, all from a process that should be relatively routine. And implications on this are real. Here's just a scale of enforcement recently. Revocations have climbed every single year. 294 in 2021, 517, up to then 726, then 1643 in 2024, and a record 3,100 last year. And in the first quarter alone of 2026, the Home Office revoked 1,545 sponsor licenses. At the current run rate, it's roughly 6,200 for the year, and of course, to double the 2025 record. And when they act, the fines range from 45 to 60,000 pounds. And I just want to put this into context as well, because there's roughly 125,000 organizations in the UK that hold a sponsor license. So thinking that 6,000 to 6,500 of those are going to lose it is like 5%. That's 1 in 20 companies that hold a sponsor license now might not hold it in a year's time. Again, the threat is ever growing. And this is what it looks like across the country. Every red dot here on this map is a sponsor license that the Home Office revoked. The point I kind of want to put across with this is that it isn't concentrated in one city or one sector. It's happening in every region, specifically across everyone's here. We said we had people from Leeds, we had people from Essex, we had people from Poole. As you can see, revocations are happening all over the country. And this is actually a project that I ran with one of my colleagues. I was really interested to know, where are these companies that are maybe losing their sponsor licenses? Is there any correlation that we could see? Is there anything that we might be able to support more broadly with? But what we actually found is revocations do happen everywhere. So what does this mean for you day to day? Again, this is just really reiterating what the increase in compliance and the burden looks like. Again, regular requests for documents and updates, more tracking of employee statuses and visa conditions. You might have data spread across multiple different systems and manual processes across HR and compliance. All of this just really leads to a higher risk of an audit than ever before. And again, just to reiterate the impact, we're looking at higher admin burden, more risk of missing key deadlines, unfortunate inconsistent compliance across the workforce, exposure during audits, and just real risk of fines, suspensions, or revocations if you get it wrong. But zooming back into CoSs, why does getting this right really matter for your business? CoS approvals and getting more CoSs is now a real bottleneck in hiring. As I said before, people might not be able to start, people might not be able to be renewed, and it can really, really cause some issues to workforce planning, especially if you're an organization who is growing fast and looking to grow. Rejected or delayed requests, again, slow that recruitment process. Poor applications increase scrutiny on your license. If they see a poor application in one place, what might they think about your other Home Office compliance duties? And again, inconsistent processes lead to repeat failures. And again, here at Borderless, what we always echo is, yeah, it's great to fix something that's broken, but can you look at the underlying system that led that to break? Perhaps it's miscommunication between teams. Perhaps not everyone has visibility on what's happening with immigration and who your sponsored workers are. And maybe not everyone is even knowledgeable around your obligations that you hold when you have a sponsor license. Cool. So now I'm actually just going to hand over to Lal. I hope just setting that scene there with how you're thinking about sponsorship and compliance, because we really do feel that the CoS is is a case where lots of things can fail first, but get this right, and it makes everything else downstream a lot easier. But yeah, over to you, Lal.
Thanks so much, Will. So yeah, I'm here now to talk to you about how certificates of sponsorship actually work. So like Will said, it's kind of the starting point after you get your license to essentially get permission to sponsor workers. So where you're asking for an overall allocation, or whether you're assigning it to a specific individual, at every stage the Home Office is assessing whether you have a genuine need to sponsor an individual. So we'll be talking through the process where the CoS fails, and also how to secure approvals. And I'll also be sharing some tips on what I've seen works, especially when it comes to certificates, requesting them, and anything handy that I can share from what I've seen in my experience. So next slide, Will, please. So, like I said, at the base level, the CoS isn't just the paperwork. So it's where most of the sponsorship problems begin. So whether it comes to allocating that CoS or requesting an allocation, the Home Office is assessing at every point if you're doing what is expected of you as a sponsor. So there is a big pressure to get it right, to avoid any workers potentially missing their start dates, where you might be left with no care no carer to cover the gaps that you have. If you get the request wrong, for example, if you get the COS wrong, you may face having to reuse another COS, or request additional allocations, which you might not have factored into the timeline. And every CoS you assign is a declaration that the Home Office can check, not only for the eligibility purposes, but also they'll be assessing whether there is a genuine need to allocate that certificate. So in the next slide, so we're going to be talking about the differences between defined and undefined certificates. So at the base level, defined certificates are for any hires that you have from outside the UK. So if you have an individual that you want to sponsor from outside the UK, it wouldn't suffice for you to assign an undefined certificate. You would need to request a defined certificate. So making sure that you request the specific type and the correct type of certificate is crucial. The undefined certificates, which is something that you might more commonly deal with, is for hires already in the UK. The main differentiating factor here is with the defined certificate, what you're already doing is that defined certificate will have a SOC code allocated to that certificate. So you can only hire for the code that the certificate is currently allocated for. Whereas an undefined certificate, you're getting a completely blank certificate where you can assign a particular role to that certificate and for a particular individual. The defined certificates are requested on a case-by-case basis. They definitely do have a quicker turnaround time when it comes to undefined certificates. That said, there's a lot more restrictions for the type of roles that you can hire on a defined certificate, particularly in the care industry. But I do see approvals come through within 24 hours to 48 hours, but also up to 5 working days, whereas undefined certificates do take slightly longer. The Home Office's SLA to approve those requests take up to 18 weeks. So preparing for this is incredibly important, but also allocating it correctly also is incredibly important. If you allocate it wrong, or if there are incorrect details on the certificate that you've allocated, you will not be able to assign that certificate. You'd have to allocate another certificate for that individual. So getting it right is incredibly crucial. Next slide, please. So there's two differentiating factors when it comes to requesting a CoS and assigning a CoS. So when you're requesting a CoS, you're asking the Home Office for a set number to allocate. At that stage, you'll have to demonstrate that the business, there have been vacancies within the business, and you need a set number of certificates to allocate to individuals that you might have already sourced or that you're yet to source for the business. This is where the problems normally arise and where careful planning is essential. So when it comes to requesting a certificate, normally, and in previous times, the Home Office advised that you prepare for this at least 3 months in advance. I would go as far as to say that if you have any expiries coming up from now until early next year, that you prepare for it at least 6 months in advance, given the delays with certificate with the COS requests processing. But also it will account for any rejections that you might have received to allow you enough time to reapply for that certificate. So this is where the Home Office is assessing whether there is a genuine need for you to hire additional workers. whether you have sufficient documents and whether you've done that capacity assessment internally, but also whether the business can afford to hire additional workers. Normally, there's some requests that are stronger than others, and we'll go through that in further slides. And then when it comes to assigning the certificate, that's when you've gotten your allocation and you are allocating it to a particular worker. So the Home Office would expect that you have that worker in mind, you have their details to complete in the form. So again, it's important that you select the correct code, the correct salary, the dates on the certificate make sense for the amount, the length of time that you're allocating. And at any point, if there's any incorrect information, for example, if you've accidentally allocated that CoS for under the wrong SOC code, the Home Office would normally expect you to reallocate a new certificate because you can't use that certificate. So they are, the certificates are sparse, and then also making sure that the information on the certificate itself is accurate is important, because if something's wrong on there, you can't use that certificate. The candidate's visa might likely be rejected if you were to use that certificate, so you need to allocate a new one. Next slide. So when it comes to the certificates themselves, so when it comes to the length of time that you issue a particular individual, that will determine how many certificates you might need moving down the line. So every extension will need a new CoS. So if you find that you're coming to the end of the sponsorship term for an individual, that's when you need to at least start thinking about whether or not you would like to keep that individual. I get questions all the time around whether the business can guarantee sponsorship after the period has ended. And normally you don't have to. So if you have promised to assign a worker sponsorship for 3 years, and you have given that worker that work for 3 years, and you come to the end of that sponsorship period and you assess that you might not actually have enough work available for that worker, there's no obligation at that point for you to continue that sponsorship period. So understanding and figuring out whether or not the business needs a sponsored worker towards the end of a person's sponsorship duration is important, not only for you to give that worker enough time to consider other options, but also for you to request the allocation that you need. So the allocation itself, when it comes to requesting allocations for extensions, I find in my experience that is a stronger argument to make for additional certificates, primarily because the Home Office is already aware that the individual's already working in the business in some capacity, they are already delivering care, and also extending their sponsorship just means that the business can retain that worker to avoid any disruption into the business. But the important and critical point at this point is that when you're assigning that certificate, that the salary must meet the rules in force at the time of the renewal and not as per their original rate that they were on previously. So normally if someone was on a previous rate and they were only being increased in line with the national living wage, at the point that you're not allocating the new certificate, you would need to meet the salary threshold at that time. And that's something to be wary of. Next slide. So when it comes to the assignment process, the Home Office does look at a few things. And the main one particularly for care companies, is that you obviously have the license and CQC registration, depending on where you're based in the UK, and that you assign the undefined CoS from your allocation, confirming 3 months on your payroll. So at this point, this is where you'll assess on a case-by-case basis whether that individual might need to provide further information in line with their visa application type to allow them to apply. So for example, we know that any individuals who are switching occupation codes into a code 6135 or 6136, if they haven't already been on that code previously and they were on another code, switching into that code would require them to provide evidence of 3 months of employment under the code that they're now going to be sponsored for. Similarly, when it comes to dependents, students or graduates who are switching into the skilled worker route, they're obviously bound by the requirements as per their visa category, but also the Home Office has recently announced in recent times that they also need to provide evidence that they've been working in some capacity for the role that they're being sponsored for at least 3 months. The important caveat here is that this only affects the code 6135 and 6136. So anything other than that or outside of that doesn't apply to this. And then the third assignment process is that the worker applies to switch into the visa route that you sponsored them for. So again, it's anyone that's switching from another visa category into the skilled worker route. Do they have the requirements? Do they meet those requirements? The main thing there is probably for students who would have had to have completed their studies in order to switch to the skilled worker route. Next slide, please. So we'll be talking here about when you can and cannot assign a certificate. So where you can assign a certificate is where the role matches the valid occupation code and clears its going rate, that you hold the right type of CoS for where the worker is, so correctly choosing whether or not that worker is on a defined CoS or undefined CoS. The job is genuine and you hold that evidence. So where they might not ask for that evidence when it comes to the visa application, I have seen cases where a candidate would have applied for a visa application, the Home Office is questioning why that role even exists within the business, and that candidate might be subject to an interview by the Home Office. But also you as a sponsor might also be interviewed, where the Home Office will then assess whether or not that role existed within the business and that you've conducted adequate recruitment, but also that individual is aware of the role that they're conducting. And I've seen this fail sometimes where in recent times I've seen somebody being sponsored as a business analyst, and when the Home Office interviewed them, they didn't know anything about the business analyst role, and that's where the application then got refused. So the Home Office will assess you at any point and any time. Although some instances are rare, you should always be ready to be assessed at any point. And then you can assign the CoS at that point that the carer is eligible to switch, if they're required to meet the 3 months on your payroll. Where you can't assign the CoS is where, for example, the individual's outside the UK and you only hold an undefined CoS. I've seen this happen in practice where an individual will come to the UK on a visit visa and would ask for a certificate of sponsorship. It's important that at that point you need to assess whether or not, under the visa conditions that they're in, if they're allowed to switch to the skilled worker route. So somebody on a visit visa is not allowed to switch onto the skilled worker visa until they leave the country and they apply from abroad. So that's where it's important to determine what type of certificate is necessary. If the salary is below the going rate for that code, the Home Office normally in these instances, if you get the salary incorrect, they will give you an opportunity to correct that through a further documents request. But I've also seen them actually more recently just blanket refuse that application. So again, it's important that the salary that you're allocating for that role clears the going threshold. If you're relying on the immigration salary list, for example, any concessions under the new entrant rules, that you adequately declare that on the certificate before you give that certificate to the individual. The start date, so if you had an individual that you wanted to sponsor maybe in December, it's too late for that CoS to be, it's too early actually for that CoS to be assigned. So waiting within that 3-month threshold is important. So it also ties in with the CoS itself and its expiry date. So when you assign a certificate, you have 3 months to use it. So on the certificate itself, you'll see that you'll have the date of assignment, but also the date of expiry, and that date will determine when, basically, the deadline for which that worker needs to submit their visa application for the Home Office to consider it. And then you can't assign a CoS, for example, where the current visa doesn't allow a switch. So that ties in with what I mentioned about the visit visa. So making sure that the worker is under the correct category to allow them to switch to the skilled worker route is incredibly important. In some cases as well, there might be an individual who's an overstayer. And at that point, if they have overstayed past a certain point, it wouldn't be appropriate to allocate a certificate, because whether or not they're eligible for that visa application is kind of unknown. So it might be worth you further considering before using up a certificate that you might be able to allocate to somebody else that's more in a more stable position. So next slide, please. So the important thing here now to do before every submission really is to validate the role against the genuine vacancy rules. So making sure that you have adequate records of that recruitment process for that individual, how this role has basically come into fruition, confirming that the salary meets the occupation code threshold, again, there's different salary tables, there's different concessions that could apply, there's different reductions that could apply. So getting it right the first time is incredibly important. Any amount that you declare on the certificate is the amount that you're guaranteeing to meet. So again, making making a business decision as to what the business can afford, because at the point that you assign it, that's where you're now obligated to adhere to that salary threshold. So it wouldn't suffice if you offered somebody a salary of 30k that you're now reducing it to 25k because that's the threshold. If you're offering more, you need to offer what you've declared on the certificate. If you need to offer less, it needs to be within the threshold, but you need to report it. Checking that every CoS field is complete and consistent as well, that's incredibly important. Making sure that the accuracy of that information is also correct according to the candidate's circumstances at the time, to avoid that CoS being rejected and you having to allocate a new one. Preparing the supporting documents up front. So I normally advise businesses to almost do a pre-assessment before they sponsor a worker. And that kind of ties in with my last point where I mentioned that if an individual is an overstayer or they have an appeal pending or they've been refused previously, it might be worth reassessing to see if a future application would even have any chance of success, because it might be that you allocate another certificate for that individual, they apply and they're refused on the same basis. So assessing whether or not each individual meets the eligibility criteria at the base level when it comes to things like overstaying or their visa history will save you from having to use a CoS that you might not be able to get back. And then also standardizing the submission process as well. So provided that you meet this criteria, you should have a framework for kind of a best use case when it comes to allocating certificates, and also when it comes to compliance, evidencing how that certificate had come to the point of assignment, because the Home Office is not only looking at the worker meeting the requirements of their visa, but also you'll be assessed on a compliance basis for how you're maintaining that sponsored worker. But the maintenance will also look at prior to their sponsorship and how you identified that their role existed, how you conducted recruitment, what documents that you have on file, and whether or not you've got things like the job vacancy that the worker had applied to, their job information, interview notes, basically evidence of recruitment. And that's what the Home Office is looking at, and they will ask for that information at any stage. Whether they ask for it at the CoS request stage or whether they ask for it after the candidate has applied for their visa application. So just having those documents on hand will support you in meeting that compliance obligation. If you don't have that, then again, the Home Office will see that as a serious failing for compliance. And in the recent guidance update, they've emphasized this point that there needs to be a genuine vacancy tied to each individual role. So if you have any concerns about how to evidence this, I'm more than happy to cover that a little bit later, but also in the chat box after this as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of getting more certificates mid-year, at the base level, the allocation is based on last year's usage, and it's not normally automatic. So what you'll see on your license summary page at the bottom is an expiry date, and that is the expiry date that normally previously would have applied to your license expiry date where you had to renew your license, but now we know that the licenses are now indefinite, open for an indefinite period. So now that amount, that date will now reflect the deadline by which you have to use any unused certificates. So if you have used, for example, 5 out of 10 certificates that you have, you've got within that deadline to use up the remaining amount. That amount that you allocate, that total amount on that license summary page, will determine where basically your next upcoming renewals and the allocation that you're likely to get. So within 3 months of that date, your renewal window will open and you'll get an email, but also you'll see on the annual renewal section that there'll be an option to submit. That request that you submit will be based on the usage that you had in the last 12 months. So it wouldn't suffice for you to ask for more than what you've allocated, because the Home Office will only approve you the amount that you've allocated, because that's what they believe that you can justify. So at that point, for example, if you've allocated 10 in the last 12 months, you can ask for another 10. I always advise that companies apply for this earlier within that 3-month window, so to avoid the Home Office having to consider that request almost as if it's a regular CoS request. I say this because I've had a case where the window opened and we applied from at least 2 or 3 weeks into that 3-month window. And when it came to that expiry date, the next day they got a top up of the amount that they used. And then I've also had a case where we've applied within a month left of that expiry date. And when we got to the end of that allocation window, the request didn't top up, and the Home Office put it under the standard queue, which could take up to 18 weeks. So this 3-month window is essentially a buffer for the Home Office to consider that case. So the earlier you apply, the longer you're giving them to consider your renewal request, and the increased chance for you to get the top up that you've asked for. If you don't apply for this top up, then the amount that you've used and all that amount, everything will disappear from the SMS, including any current certificates of CoS requests that you have on the SMS. So essentially, the system will refresh in terms of any certificates. So again, applying for it earlier rather than later is critical. Again, if you did run out, worst case scenario, you can again request additional. It's just that I think the annual renewal system is almost like an advantageous way for you to get certificates without having to jump through the hoops that you do normally for an in-year allocation request. At any point, if you did run out of time, you could always submit an in-year allocation request as well. So it's not that you're out of options completely. Next slide, please. So planning around certificates and things to consider. So we obviously know that there's a few deadlines that we need to be mindful of, but also certain circumstances relating to individuals. So when it comes to defined certificates, the turnaround time is a lot quicker than undefined. So normally in this, it's kind of better. I think you have a lot more flexibility when it comes to planning around undefined requests, because normally there's no visa expiry tied to an individual status. The person's already overseas. So requesting that ahead of time is always the best case. They are decided within 1 working day, but that's not to say that every case is decided within 1 working day. Again, the Home Office needs to see a business case. So whether you submit that request, the Home Office is looking at the role that you're sponsoring for, but also your business as a whole and all the information they have of your business to date. So again, that request might be subject to a further documents request, at which point it does fall under the standard queue. So preparing for undefined requests ahead of time, making sure that you have the salary information, the details on the CoS. The request itself and how you fill it is completely different to the undefined request. So making sure that the details you're putting in is accurate is important to getting that defined CoS approved within the SLA that they promise. If the request is queried, you've got up to 10 to 15 working days, and in rare cases up to 18 weeks. It all depends on your ability to secure priority slot, which it is quite difficult to secure priority slots as of late. The Home Office releases up to 60 to 100 slots per day for the entire country. So that's every single sponsor, every single business, and there's thousands. Everyone's asking for the same slot. So it is definitely difficult to secure it. It's not impossible, but planning around this is critical to ensure that at least you're prepared for any delays. So planning ahead of time, 6 months in advance for any expiries that you know are coming up within that window will at least give you and the candidates an advantageous position, so that nobody's left scrambling. So if they did respond to any further documents requests, or did respond to your priority request, they do again say that they have 5 working days by which they will consider that CoS request. Again, what I've seen in practice is that they will get back to you within 5 working days, either with a decision or a further documents request. At the point that you respond to a further documents request, that's where the processing times are slightly dubious. So it could take up to 18 weeks, depending on the information that you've provided and the complexities of your case. I've sometimes also seen it in rare occasions where if you're asking for a small amount and they've approved your priority request, then those requests normally are decided within a week or two of you sending those further documents requests. And then the main thing when it comes to sponsoring a worker, so there's the added pressure of having someone that's already in the UK that is subject to an expiry date of their visa, but also they have these additional caveats that they have to satisfy. So the best example I can give you is a student who is working for your business. If you know that you need to evidence 3 months of employment, then it's important to get that in process, or that process in motion well before the expiry date of their visa. I've dealt with a few difficult situations where the worker has only completed 1 month of employment, but also their visa is subject to expiring. So you don't want to find yourself in that position. I would say for any students you have, graduates or dependents, at least that you have 3 months of employment ready, at least a month before the expiry date of their visa, just to give them enough time to submit an application, but also so that you're not scrambling, waiting to accrue additional time for them to evidence that 3 months of employment. Next slide, please. So in every request, again, like I said, they're looking at several different things. So they're looking at the role evidence, that you're able to evidence the job details, the signed employment contracts, and any information that you've used to consider that worker to assess whether or not they're suitable for that role. They'll be looking at operational evidence, so staffing data, team capacity, business needs, contracts. They'll ask for organizational charts where they want to see where the vacancies lie within the business. And then they also want evidence of candidates' information. So what they want to see is that the business can financially support that candidate, so that the monthly income after the company outgoings and staff wages, that the business still has enough capital to fund additional worker salary, but also that worker is eligible to switch or to be sponsored based on their visa category. And this is where most CoS requests fail, and this is where there's not much guidance online about this. So the Home Office will assess on a case-by-case basis, but you're only as good as the evidence that you can provide. So making sure this evidence is very clear and that you've at least gone and identified a worker before you've put in that request is critical, which I know in most cases doesn't really work with how businesses are structured. Normally you will have a certificate to guarantee to a worker before you've offered them that position, but the Home Office kind of want you to do it the other way around, where you've identified this worker, you've kind of set them an offer, the offer is guaranteed, and that's when you're requesting the certificate to show the Home Office that, I've got this individual, this is how they meet the criteria, and this is how the business can afford to hire this worker, and we've got these contracts that the business needs to staff, and we've got this individual who's suitable and qualified, and that's why we need the certificate. Which again, if you don't have those documents on hand when you do get a further documents request, that's where you'll be scrambling, trying to find this evidence. So again, preparing for that CoS request and preparing for those further documents requests ahead of time will put you in a best position to respond to the Home Office in a timely manner within that 5 working day deadline they give you. Next slide, please. So yeah, there's other evidences that we've seen increase the chances of getting certificates. So essentially, the Home Office wants to see that you can justify every certificate that you've asked for. So there's certain ways that you can do that. The best way to do it is to provide a capacity assessment. The Home Office's rationale is that they want you to either have had new contracts, or they want to see that the existing workforce cannot work the hours that you have right now that you need to deliver. So a capacity assessment could include a summary of the individual's contracted hours. So that's the hours that you can guarantee that you're delivering, and you can show that they're fulfilling, but also any overtime hours that they're working, because that is additional surplus hours that worker is working, that the company cannot normally guarantee that they'll be able to have the staff in place. And if you're able to demonstrate that based on the total overtime hours that the company is currently outsourcing and giving, that you have enough hours to sponsor maybe 1 or 2 or 3 workers, that's one of the strongest cases that you have. If you had any departures within the business, if you're able to provide those P45s to show that staff turnaround has taken place and that you need to replace the staff that have left with additional staff. That is, again, a strong business case. I would say, though, that with if there is high turnaround within a business, it's not normally advisable to rely on that as the sole purpose for why you need additional certificates, because, again, the Home Office is questioning why there is turnover. So it's one of those things where you'd have to make an assessment and a judgment call based on the amount of turnover the business has had. So too much turnover isn't good, but some turnover is good enough to help you with that request. So they want to see new contracts, increased service hours, and organizational changes. So normally in these cases as well, I've seen it where you've applied for a tender and you're waiting to hear back from that. And normally in these cases, the Home Office wouldn't deem a tender request or a tender application as sufficient enough to demonstrate that you have the business in place. They want to see that you've taken on a new service user and now you're subject to delivering hours, which, again, I understand it doesn't really work in the care industry because you would need to have the staffing in place first before you're able to take on that care. But the Home Office essentially want you to have this buffer window where you're kind of trying to adjust with the workers that you do have to show that you've got these contracts in place, but then it would help you support a request for additional certificates. So the additional evidence that they're asking for now as well is the full names, details, CoS numbers for any of the visas, any of the individuals that you're ready to sponsor. So this is new workforce, but also existing workforces. Having the details of any individuals that are due to expire that are already working within the business is always the strongest case that you can make for additional certificates. And then when it comes to any acquisitions or transfers, which is quite rare and few and far between, it's important that if anyone's subject to an expiry, that before the business has exchanged hands, that at least those workers have a significant amount of time on their visa, because what you'll be doing on your end is doing a staff transfer request. So ensuring that everyone's got enough time in their visa to account for the processing times of a transfer request would help that individual. And normally I would give 18 weeks plus 6 to 8 weeks for you to have applied for a new license if that's needed, but also the transfer request itself takes up to 18 weeks to process. So normally in those instances, if you ask the seller or somebody, the existing owners, to assign that CoS and switch that worker over or extend that worker's visa, that would support them when it comes to this transfer request to avoid any impact to their sponsorship. Next slide, please. So normally requests fail when it comes to the genuine vacancy rules. I mentioned earlier that this is an area that the Home Office has emphasised in the recent guidance updates. So where they're looking at the justification that you've given for the overall CoS request, they'll be assessing at every point throughout the lifespan of your license that there is a genuine vacancy for every role that you sponsor for. So it might be that you're not called out on it when you apply for your license or when you have your license, but these things do come to light when it comes to a certificate, like a CoS request assignment. So they look at a few things, and what I've seen that they look at mainly when it comes to the point that the candidates applied for a visa application is if the role actually makes sense for the business, but also makes sense for that worker's visa history. So if the Home Office has all the information of a worker's CoS history and all the roles that they've applied for, it wouldn't randomly suffice for somebody who is a carer to suddenly work as I don't know, a software engineer if it doesn't look like they have the information or the experience to undertake the role. So making sure that every individual that you have meets the criteria and the experience needed for the role is essential. The job description that you have for that code, so you have on the CoS as well, needs to match the occupation code that you've selected. There's a few roles sometimes where there's a few duties in that role that would shift that occupation code into a different code. So making sure that you're constantly assessing the job descriptions that you have, if there are ever any changes to the business, is critical. And I've seen a lot of CoS requests, but also visa applications fail on this basis. So making sure that the responsibilities are very clear and aligned specifically with that worker's occupation code is critical. Where it might not have been caught out on the visa application stage, it will definitely be caught out in an audit, or where you've allocated a worker a particular job description at the initial stage that you've assigned that certificate. If that role has now evolved and changed, if you're ever to be invited for an audit, the Home Office will be interviewing the staff. So they'll be asking them what they're doing day to day. So again, they need to have some level of understanding of what their role is. If they mention things that will bring them outside the occupation code, that will put the genuine vacancy into question. And then also not enough evidence of business need. So where I mentioned you need to be able to demonstrate the capacity assessment, that every role was subject to a capacity assessment before it even came into fruition. And you can show from the timeline, from that point that you've made that assessment up until the workers sponsored, that you have that evidence on file, would avoid the Home Office putting that genuine vacancy into question. And if failure to do so will impact the license. Next one. And then on a similar note, when it comes to the genuine vacancy, the salary is also another topic that's being put into question. So making sure that the role meets the threshold for the role, the salary meets the threshold for the role that you're sponsoring for. The hours are calculated correctly. So example I can give you, if we're looking at the care industry, is if you're offering a salary of £25,000 per year, then the Home Office's assessment and how they assess salary is that they'll base it off of a 37.5-hour work week. And they state that if the hours change at any point, then you need to prorate that salary to work out what the hourly rate would then be. So it wouldn't suffice, for example, to offer somebody a CoS under 40 hours but offer them £25,000, because when the Home Office does their calculations, they'll actually see that the hourly rate is where the salary will fail. So if the hourly rate is at the base minimum, £12.82 per hour, that's what you would need to meet. And then that would be multiplied by the hours that you're offering per week. And then that will be multiplied by the 52 months in a year. And then the salary as well also directly ties into the occupation code. So if there's any concessions that you're relying on, whether that worker's a new entrant, whether you're relying on the immigration salary list, making sure that that's specified on the CoS. Otherwise, the Home Office will assume that you're not relying on any concessions. They're not going to assume that you're potentially relying on a lower rate if you haven't explicitly said that you're relying on the lower rate. So making sure that you either have a sponsor note on that CoS, if it's not mentioned in any section that you can tick. But I'm aware that for immigration salary list roles, that you can tick that the role is in the immigration salary list. So making sure those sections are ticked on the CoS after you assign it is again critical. And if you do miss that, making sure that you have a sponsor note on that CoS before you give that CoS to the worker will avoid any rejections or any delays when it comes to the Home Office asking for further information or documents. The critical point here is that if the visa application was rejected, that CoS can no longer be reused. So making sure you get it right is important to not only lose out on the CoS, but also have to go through the process again. Slide.
Awesome. I think that's you, Lo. Thank you so much for that. I think every time you present, even I still learn something, and we do these like every other week. But awesome. Given what Lowell said, I would love to understand how confident you feel in your own CoS request process. As you can see, lots goes into this, lots can go wrong. So it'd be really good just to sense check the room. I also can see there's lots of questions, so we'll be getting to those shortly as well. Just going to send this question out. I'm just going to give it a few seconds to let people reply or to submit their answers. So we're seeing which is really positive. About 20-30% of people are really confident. 50% are somewhat confident, which I think is like the most common reply we get. And then there's a section of individuals who are perhaps not too confident at all, just about 3-4 people, about 15% of people that responded to the poll. Cool, that's really, really helpful. I actually now just want to touch on how Borderless supports with your CoS applications and approvals. At Borderless, we built the best-in-class immigration platform that really supports you end-to-end, and obviously a big part of that is getting you more COSs. And what we've done is translated everything in Lowell's mind, everything in our best immigration advisors' minds into the platform, such that we validate every request before it goes to submission digitally, so there's no time missed. We standardize applications to speed processing, keep documentation complete and accurate, and track allocations. So there's never a missed deadline. And this is working really, really well. So you can really see this as you're not only just learning your own experience with immigration, you're learning from over 600 other organizations' experience with immigration. And what we've seen is that here at Borderless, we're able to get CoSs 96% of the time, up from roughly a 30% industry average across the UK. And how we're doing this, we're submitting 75 CoS requests roughly a week, and have received over 6,000 individual CoSs successfully, which we've supported securing them. And don't just take our word for how we've been supporting organizations. Over at Wessex Care saying, using Borderless has helped Wessex Care streamline their sponsorship process while bringing down their legal costs. And the Borderless platform provides a quick and easy way to sponsor migrant workers and gives them peace of mind that they're compliant with immigration law. I'm also just going to leave you with one last video before we zoom into our Q&A. And this is really around how we're going to support you with ongoing compliance. So here is Tom, our product operations director, talking through our new feature, Halo.
Halo is a brand new compliance product from Borderless. It gives you a single view of your compliance position across your entire business, including your compliance score, workers by status, any document compliance gaps, the status and remaining CoS on your sponsor licenses, any changes that you need to report to the Home Office that have been flagged by Halo, and a single action that you can take per document to fill any compliance gaps. Take employment details, for example. You've got the ability to audit job descriptions across your entire workforce or even on an individual basis. We'll show you the information that we've extracted from that employee's CoS and allow you to reuse that on the Borderless platform. If you need to fill any payslip gaps, you can use our smart document uploader, which will allow you to upload as many documents as you need. We'll extract information from those documents, match them against the individuals, and then we'll tell you if there are any compliance gaps that have been found in those documents. Thank you.
Awesome. I always think, thank you, Tom, even though Tom's not here and that is recorded. But awesome. So now to the final session today. I'm really conscious of time, but I can see there's a few chat and questions in the chat. So I'm not sure if you just want to read through some of those, though I can see you being really proactive and getting back to some of them already.
Yeah, of course. I was actually just answering James's question about the allocation. So they received an allocation. So they allocated 15 in July, and that they need at least 10 to cover the people whose sponsorship expire before the next renewal. So normally with this, you'll need to assess whether you're actually coming up to your CoS allocation window, so the expiry date. If you don't have any expiries coming up after or before that date, you could submit the request in before the 3 months and request that to be topped up automatically. If you're not within that window, then it would just be an in-year CoS allocation request. The allocation requests will require you to present a 2,000 character limit where you'll need to put in all the information that you have to justify why you need the certificates. So making sure that you have the information on any individuals that you want to sponsor, the reasons why the business needs it, also the salary you're offering, the job description, the role that you're sponsoring for. So it's a very, very small window, a very small character limit to put in all that information. So if you do need support, we're obviously happy to help with supporting you with that. But at the base level, that 2,000 character limit needs to include that vital bit of information to give the requested chance of success. Craig asked, how would the Home Office view a CoS that's been assigned to a senior carer undertaking a shift as a care assistant to cover sickness? Would they be still paying the care assistant rate? So at the base level, a worker cannot work a role that they're not being sponsored for. So it would not suffice for them to undertake shifts as a care assistant to cover that sickness. You would need to find another individual who is under that care assistant occupation code to cover that sickness. A senior care worker can only cover a shift as a senior care worker, nothing above or nothing below that role. So when Leigh asked, does the Home Office look at the annual salary or the monthly salary? So it kind of depends on the worker's work pattern. So they'll be looking that the worker is meeting the annual salary overall. But when it comes to the work pattern, they'll be assessing salary compliance based on a monthly basis, and they'll be looking at 3 months at a time. Is the worker on track to meeting the salary threshold? And if that's not the case, then that's where you'll be having issues with salary compliance and the worker not meeting the threshold. If the worker works irregular work patterns, then they'll be looking and assessing this over a 17-week period. So every 17-week period that you look at, the Home Office wants to see that the worker is on track to receiving or is already receiving at least the salary threshold if you were to divide that based on the length of time and the year. So it is slightly technical. I would say maintaining salary is incredibly important, and that's where they're assessing salary compliance. They've got information from HMRC records, and so they're assessing this on the back end. So making sure you're maintaining this at the base level is critical. I don't know if we have enough time, Will, for any more questions, but if you did have any other questions, feel free to drop us an email. I'm happy to clarify. There's a few questions here that might need a few back and forth where I want to clarify a few things and then make you aware of certain other things. So it is quite hard to answer it in the limited time that we have now, but happy to answer it by email if you do send one over.
Yeah, thank you so much. We are 3 minutes over time. I think we've delivered a lot in today's sessions. So thank you everyone that's joined. If we haven't been able to get to your question, as Lowell said, please get in contact with us or drop us a line and we'll be able to support you. Causes are always, it seems, the top of organizations' minds, and we're here to support you where we can. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day and enjoys the bank holiday weekend when it comes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chan. Thank you.
Bye.